Well, today is an interesting day. It's the beginning of a new month. It's May 1st, and we are obviously in the second half of the Easter season. This is the month where we return to ordinary time, at least during the weekdays. And this is also St. Joseph the Worker Day. Now, this day has an interesting history because this is the day that we celebrate St. Joseph as a worker. And the reason why this day exists in the church is as a counter to this being Communist Workers' Day. So that's why St. Joseph the Worker is this day. And this is always a good day to pray, and especially for workers. Now, by the way, speaking of workers, what is considered the beginning of Catholic social doctrine is the encyclical Rerum Novarum, which I have greatly enjoyed teaching on this in the past. And so I think we're going to look towards maybe a way locally that I can teach it again. But one of the important things about Rerum Novarum is, by the way, this is where the church began its support for unions, but also asked unions to make as part of the contract that people can go to church on Sunday, which is that little part that they forgot when the church supports unions. Yeah, we also support you working in your contract that people can go to church on Sunday morning. So anyway, but in case you didn't know that, the church supports unions. And so that's an important consideration. That's why oftentimes the church hires union labor for that reason. Now, so we put all of that together and we recognize this whole thing as the three things that come together. Now, as you know, we look at the first reading, and I'm going to focus on the first reading, which is Acts. Anytime you have a memorial of a saint, and we haven't covered these at all, you also have the option of doing the reading for that particular saint. However, liturgically, the church prefers that you continue reading the regular daily readings for the continuity. So we look at those realities. So that's why we're going to keep on Acts and not do the readings for St. Joseph the Worker, even if at Mass today you celebrate St. Joseph the Worker. You can still use the daily readings, which in this case, of course, as I said, would be Acts, for that reason, that the church wants you, if possible, to keep the continuity. So what we're looking at in the Acts of the Apostles today is this focus where St. Paul is explaining further the story of how Jesus came to be the Son of God per se. I mean, he always was, but how they came to understand that he is the Son of God, he is the Savior, and everything else, to the Jewish people where they are at this point. And so, and what he explains is that Jesus is condemned to death, even though he didn't do anything wrong, and people didn't recognize that he is the Messiah, and so they put him to death. He raised from the dead, and now, as he says, we are here proclaiming this good news to you. And of course, we know there are people that accept this, and there are people that don't in this time, and also in our own time. We see that. One of the things that I've been thinking of, because if we look at what's going on at that time, Paul is trying to explain that Jesus is the fulfillment of the Scriptures. And we say that during the Creed. So he's trying to explain that this Jesus that he's talking about is the one whom the Old Testament prophets talked about. So this is the one. And he's calling people to sign on. Now, a lot of people obviously didn't, and to this day, there are many in the Jewish community that will not accept Jesus as the Messiah. And it doesn't make them bad people by any chance, by any stretch of the imagination. I've spoken to Jews, and they'll say, no, he was a good man, he was a prophet, he wasn't the Messiah. That's what they'll say. Okay, they don't believe that. And that was also part of the prophecy, by the way. But I want you to look at something else that's important, because we're living in a time similar to Paul's, where he's trying to preach to the Jewish people. Eventually he goes to the Gentiles, and the Jewish people don't accept him. Many of the Jewish people. Many do, but many don't. I think in this country, there is one messianic, which means one messianic temple, one messianic synagogue, which means that there is one synagogue in all of the United States. I could be wrong here, but I do believe, at least it's the largest, but I think there's only one that recognizes Jesus as the Messiah, and that's in Dallas, Texas. I've been there. So there is one synagogue that recognizes Jesus as the Messiah, because the Jews do not generally, and there are some who are called Messianic Jews who do. All right. Well, now we're living in a different kind of time, and we're not trying to convince necessarily the Jews that Jesus is the Messiah, as Paul did. We're trying to convince the scientists. Now, you have to realize that many scientists believe that Jesus is the Messiah. But, of course, many scientists don't. Many scientists are atheist or agnostic, and that goes with science. It goes with it. But what we have to understand is that when we look at Jesus and we start to understand the whole history of Jesus and the whole message of Jesus, as Jesus is the Messiah, we also have to understand that science cannot contradict him. And what I mean is, you don't fix your science so it doesn't contradict. No, science cannot contradict who Jesus is. Cannot. Because if we assume Jesus is the truth, which we do, and we assume that science is looking for truth, those two cannot contradict each other. And so when we understand that, we can understand Jesus from a level of science that we haven't reached yet, which is where I always go. That's why I am a firm believer in evolution. No, evolution does not teach. Evolution teaches that man came from monkeys. I'm not going to believe that. I've literally had people yell at me. I said that to you yesterday about that. No, that's not what evolution teaches. Never has, never will. But that's why I'm a firm believer in evolution, because I do believe evolution is part of science. And when we understand evolution, we can understand further the whole reality of who we are in light of Jesus being the Son of God. Then we see creation. It still happens through God, but it's a longer process, and it's not a random process. That's the one difference we have with evolutionary biologists. They believe everything is all random. We don't. But you understand. So we recognize that Jesus is the Messiah, but in understanding that, we recognize that the level of science to understand Jesus is higher than the level of science that we are presently capable of. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to get into Teilhard de Chardin territory, where he believed that Jesus was the ultimate evolved human being, and when we die, we will encounter Jesus as the fulfillment of evolution. I don't believe that. That's been condemned as a heresy. And some of the stuff he said was right on, and some of it was a heresy. That always goes with the creator of any idea. But what we do have to understand is that our understanding of science is just like, relatively speaking, in light of Jesus the Messiah, is just like the Jewish understanding of the fulfillment of the Scriptures during the time Paul is speaking to them, and they're not there yet, and neither are many who reject Jesus as the Messiah. Are they there yet? That doesn't contradict science or Jesus. It says that we are still coming to an understanding. And when we fully understand science, we will fully understand the reality of Jesus as the Messiah. That's what I firmly believe. And I mean that we, as in the human race, not as a you and I, because going to be a long, long, long time before humanity fully understands science. But we've come a long way in the past 100 or 200 years. If you went back to the 16th century, you would see a level of science that wouldn't be that much different than the science of 1,000 years before. If we went back to the 16th century and then they came here, they would see a level of science that was well beyond what they understood in the 16th century. So our science is always developing, but so eventually it'll come to the point where we will fully understand how Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Messiah. Whereas in science, our science knowledge is developing, and our understanding of Jesus is deepening. Remember always what I say. They say, well, God cannot change. True. But our understanding of God does. Just as our understanding of the sun has changed over the millennia, but the sun has never changed. It's always been the same. So it's that same dynamic. We're going to talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media podcast on our Friday edition, on May 1st edition, on St. Joseph the Worker edition. It's all there on this very day. Remember to subscribe, to also to like, to comment, and pass the word. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media Podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer, previews of upcoming podcasts, previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com, your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and again, today is St. Joseph the Worker Day, and we told you the history of it. This is the Church's response to today, making today the Day of the Worker as celebrated in communism. Very fascinating. I read Richard Wolff's book on communism, on Marxism, and I'd love to have him on sometime. Maybe I should contact him. But one of the things that Richard Wolff explains is that communism as we understand, I'm not pro-communist, but communism as we understand it today is not the communism that Marx wanted to create, because he wanted to build a fully democratic system. That was Marx's idea. And of course, if we look at the history of communism, we can see it's tyrannical. Probably, what is it that the place that calls themselves a socialist paradise is North Korea. Talk about lying and try. If you repeat a lie enough, people will believe it. I don't think you could lie as much as possible that it would take to convince people that North Korea is a paradise. But in any way, that's the whole point. That's what he explains. True Marxism is a democracy. Everything is decided democratically. I wouldn't necessarily believe in that system because I don't think that can function. I think you need some kind of a hierarchy of some type, at least most of the time, to guide. And that's one of the questions I would love to find out. What was the role of the local representative in a communist state? And we have some, like in China, what is the role of the local representative in China? Now, the local representative should be loyal to the Communist Party, But the bottom line is, going by Tip O'Neill's famous statement that all politics is local, if your street light isn't working, someone's got to fix that. And the guy could be loyal to the Democratic Party. He could be loyal to Martian intelligence or stuff. But fine, you can be loyal to whoever you want. But fix the street light. You hear what I'm saying? Is there a response on the local level to take care of the issues that have to be dealt with on a local level? We used to say, when I was in the military, that you had the local farmer in Vietnam. That was obviously, I was in after the Vietnam War. I'm not old enough for the Vietnam War. So this was after the Vietnam War, but we'd obviously have a lot of the fellow shipmates who were Vietnam veterans. Obviously, they were older. And they would explain, it says, you'd have this local farmer, and the Americans would come in and they would give them all free tractors and everything else so that they would be loyal to the Americans. And then the Vietnamese would come in, the North Vietnamese at that point. At that point, you had North Vietnam, which was communist, and South Vietnam, which wasn't. And the North Vietnamese would come in, and they'd give them a whole new set of tractors, make them loyal to the North Vietnamese. So the reality was they wanted to make people loyal based on the quality of their life. That's the way politics works. That's the way it works. So if that's happening, and if they are making people loyal based on the quality of their life, then you have to look at a communist system and saying, is that the way it functions? And you have to look at your own system. You know, one of the things that people will say, used to say when Ted Kennedy was alive, and let me add here, the two people from Massachusetts who were most hated in the rest of the country, at least while they were doing their jobs, were Ted Kennedy and Tom Brady. I got to stop saying, Ted Kennedy and Tom Brady. Well, Ted Kennedy was a master of constituent services. If you called Ted Kennedy's office, you'd get a response. That's the way Ted Kennedy worked. And that's the way your representative should work in this country, and especially your congressperson should work in this country. If you call their office, you get a response. That's the way they should work. And they should be actively involved in the issues in your congressional district, or if they happen to be a senator, in the entire state. And the same goes for the local legislators in your particular state. They should respond and they should take action. That's why they're there. People don't always understand that. And that's why if you have a congressperson, we won't mention anybody's name, but if you have a congressperson who you perceive is doing absolutely nothing, he's got to be voted out of office, or she's got to be voted out of office, because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. If they're supposed to do their job, which is to make sure the issues are taken care of in your district, and they're not doing the job, they should be voted out. That's why they're there. So when you understand that's the whole focus, right? Well, in a democratic system, if that local stuff works, and I mean totally democratic, which we don't have, we have a Republican system, democratic republic. But true Marxism is supposed to be fully democratic, totally. Well, the question is, if you have a Marxist system that is fully democratic, the issue of how successful it is not necessarily how successful it is on a national level. It's how successful it is on the local level. That's every political system. So if you have your Marxist representative, who, by the way, makes sure the streets work, that's fine. That street lights work, that's fine. But if you have potholes forever and a day, then the system isn't working. And that same goes for your local system in the current country, in the United States, or whatever country you happen to be listening from. If you're sitting there and you've got a pothole there for 2 years and it's never been fixed and it's getting worse, then your local representative needs to be voted out because he's not or she's not doing their job. This is the issue. So this is really one of the things that we want to look at, and that's what a Catholic politician should do as well. So we can look at the Marxist system, we can look at communism, we can look at capitalism, we can look at all the systems, especially on this day where our focus is making sure you honor the worker in St. Joseph, and in light of this being Communist Day. And the bottom line is, how does the system work? Play communist all you want, but if you can't fix the streetlights, your system doesn't work. Play capitalist all you want, but if you can't fix the streetlights, the system doesn't work. Long time ago, we were looking for a new pastor at a parish. The old pastor was transferred, and they were looking for a new pastor. And they gave a list of all the things a pastor should have. And they keep the streets clean, keep the lights on. This is literally what they wrote, keep the kids busy and stuff. And I said, this is what a mayor does. That's not what a pastor does. They were so focused on the political, and that's what a mayor does. I said, you're looking for a mayor. A pastor is going to help people spiritually understand how to live and how to turn into people who will serve others. We're going to be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. We'll be right back. Life can be challenging, but amidst the trials and tribulations, there is wisdom to be found. Welcome to Sirach 2, a chapter filled with timeless guidance and insights from the book of Sirach. In this chapter, we learn the importance of remaining steadfast in our faith, even in the face of adversity. It teaches us to be patient, for trials can shape our character and lead to spiritual growth. Seeking wisdom and understanding is of utmost importance. Sirach 2 reminds us to study the teachings of the wise, be open to correction, and follow God's commandments. By doing so, we can find true fulfillment and blessings. Don't be discouraged by the temporary prosperity of the wicked or the challenges you may face. Trust in God's justice, for he rewards those who diligently seek him. Join us on this journey of faith as we discover the path to a meaningful and fulfilling life. Sirach 2 is your roadmap to wisdom, patience, and eternal blessings. Read Sirach 2 and let its timeless wisdom guide you through life's ups and downs. Available now in the book of Sirach, part of the Old Testament. Brought to you by the voice of St. Anthony Parish in Alston. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. So we've got the weekend coming up. I don't have a weekend program, but we will be back on Monday, and we're going to be on, obviously, the 5th week of Easter, and we're going to be looking at Acts 14. And we're going to take a look at how Acts 14, as we continue, brings us to the healing of a crippled man, and Paul doing this. And remember what I said, this is all there to affirm this is who we are. And then we learn people think Paul is Zeus. Oh, no, he's not. So we're going to take a look at that. In the meantime, have yourself a blessed day. We will be back on Monday. And remember to subscribe, to like, to comment. Let people know, hey, I listened to this podcast. It's not like all the other podcasts, because it really tries to bring the Catholic issues and the scriptures, the first reading, into the real world. That's what we try to do here. So we'll be back on Monday.
Yeah, you know the real is back. Father Carr Chaplain from the city of champions, dropping daily reflections coming straight from the field. The raw truth revealed for the strong-willed. It's the Greatest Act of Defiance podcast with your host Father Carr, a message built to last. The Greatest Act of Defiance podcast. That's right, the Greatest Act of Defiance. Word up. Word up. Word up.
The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.